Welcome to Think About It with your host, Jaden Miller.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me on my podcast, Think About It with Jaden Miller. This is Jaden Miller. Hope that you guys are doing well. Hope that your new year has started off wonderful. Hey, you guys know I'm on all of the podcast platforms. You can find me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Google Podcast, Castbox, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio. I'm on all of them. So feel free to join me on them. Please like, comment, follow, share your thoughts with me. Again, I'm on all of your favorite podcast platforms. And also I'm on YouTube. So join me on my YouTube channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. Feel free to comment on the episode. So what I do on my YouTube channel is, of course, I record my podcast, but I also record it on video. So that way you can actually see me in action. All right. So I actually do not talk specifically to the camera. I'm just recording it. I'm just simply doing a podcast, just talking, just sharing my thoughts and my opinions with you all, and again hoping that you all will join me and feel free to comment as well. So today's episode is going to be on a topic that is usually quite controversial. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pros and cons approach to it. It's an age-old topic that that has caused a lot of angst, with people, has caused a lot of discussion, has, caused a lot of people to be upset. And of course, it's a topic that has been in court systems for many, many years. And that topic is affirmative action. So I'm going to talk a little bit about affirmative action. Yes, affirmative action in the year 2022. It is still a thing. It is still something that's being debated. And affirmative action, pros and cons, have ignited fierce debate for generations. The thing is, with systemic racism continually discussed today, I think maybe it's time to revisit this contentious strategy for building racial justice. All right. So in the United States, affirmative action describes efforts to expand access to educational and economic opportunities to historically excluded groups. Okay. And what we mean by historically excluded groups is, and it's, a lot of times people get this opinion that it's, African Americans, but not necessarily. Okay. Such policies, these economic policies, these access to educational policies aim to get rid of discrimination and correct for past discrimination in selection processes for college and work opportunities. So today, affirmative action generally supports racial, ethnic, and religious minorities, women, people with disabilities, LGBT individuals, and some veterans. Okay, so this whole notion of affirmative action does not just rest with African Americans or Latinos, but it expands the gamut to include religious groups and women and people with disabilities as well. Okay, so affirmative action and its roots lie in United States labor law and the civil rights movement. So we had Democratic President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who actually issued the first order preventing federal defense workers from discriminating against workers based on race, color, creed, or national origin. So it really gets its beginnings back when Franklin D. Roosevelt was president. Okay, so this 1941 decree came as African Americans increasingly protested Jim Crow laws, barring them from jobs in World War II factories. So over the next 30 years, presidents and state federal legislatures strengthened these measures, supporting historically disadvantaged groups. However, affirmative action isn't always supported. 8 states have banned the use of related programs in public sector hiring and college admissions. Before talking about political stances, let me talk a little bit about affirmative action pros and cons. So let's talk about the pros of affirmative action first. I'll get into some of these, all right? So one of the pros is that it ensures diversity is in place, all right? So this policy is a way to make sure that diversity is achieved and maintained in workplaces and schools. Again, you're joining me, Jaden Miller, on my podcast, Think About It with Jaden Miller. So I want you to think about it here. Affirmative action, number one pro, it ensures diversity is in place, all right? The policy is a way to make sure that diversity is achieved and maintained in workplaces and schools, thus helping create tolerant communities as it exposes individuals to various ideas and cultures that are different from their own. All right, so we're talking about the pros of affirmative action, and we're talking about it ensures diversity is in place. Does it really? Diversity is desirable and will not always occur if left to chance. The ability to interact with other nationalities and races should be part of the education process, which can alleviate problems experienced by many students who live very segregated lives. All right. So for example, okay, before the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision, all right, well, African American kids could not go to school, specifically in the South, okay, but in other areas too, but they couldn't go to school with white children. So you had black kids for all of their lives having one experience or experiencing only one culture, their own, okay? And the same thing with white children, all right? Well, when the Supreme Court outlawed this type of segregation or separation, all right, then over some years it brought kids together, all right, so that they could learn from each other and experience things with each other, with the ultimate goal of finding out that well, guess what? We probably aren't as different, as our parents, taught us, all right? See, normally opinions of other groups of people are based on stereotypes, but interaction would allow students to learn that members of opposite races are people too, more or less just like themselves. Since most people desire diversity, it is important to make sure colleges and universities will represent a wide range of backgrounds, but without affirmative action, this diversity is much less likely to occur. It will even be possible that schools become segregated like the ones in the past. So, for example, elite schools might once again become increasingly dominated by students from majority groups. Take note that diversity is so important and we cannot leave it to chance. All right, so that is one of the pros of affirmative action. All right, well, I just talked about a pro. Let me talk about a con of affirmative action. I can't talk this evening. It can serve as a reverse discrimination, all right? Primarily, affirmative action was designed to end unfair treatment and discrimination of anyone based on color. But in effect, it has done the opposite. Now, again, we're talking about the cons of affirmative action. White people who are more qualified and are working harder can be passed over strictly because of their color. Contrary to the usual stereotypes, many groups under the minorities have fallen into the middle or upper class, while many white people are now living in poverty. Looking at the way things are set up now, a poverty-stricken white student who uses hard work and discipline to become the best could unfortunately be passed over by a rich minority student who is not putting much effort at all, okay? This definitely does not justify the past discrimination against certain minority groups. All people should always be equal under the country's laws and should always be treated accordingly, all right? So that is a con of affirmative action. Now, I just want to comment on that for a little bit, okay? Well, first and foremost, let's talk about how this nation was created, was born, okay? There's time. First of all, we need to talk about who wrote the Declaration of Independence, And why? Well, of course, these United States, or at the time, these United Colonies, were trying to break away from Great Britain. And Great Britain at the time was a, tyrannical nation over the colonies. And King George III was not a nice man, okay? He used his red coats, his, British military to really undermine and really hurt the colonists, especially when they decided that they wanted to move in a different direction. All right, well, after the Declaration of Independence, of course, the United States won, and then there was a United States Constitution that was written. But, it was written under the guise that, all men are created equal. But we come to find, as we research and do history, that not all men were equal. It was all white men, and usually all rich white men. And it did not even include women, as well. So these men were married to women, and they weren't even equal to them. So, when we talk about affirmative action, when we talk about, it can serve as a reverse discrimination, I think some people would argue that, well, it hasn't been fair for so-called minority groups in this nation since its founding, maybe even before, okay? And so, the amount of time after the civil rights movement, has been minimal in comparison that, to all the time before, where African Americans were slaves. And if they weren't slaves, they were still subjected to horrible conditions and horrible racial issues. And so when do you catch up? Okay. When do you become equal? Okay. Yes, all people should always be equal under the country's laws, but has that ever been so? And that's part of the reason why the pros for affirmative action, would argue that this it can serve as a reverse discrimination. They find that faulty. All right. Here's another pro. It helps disadvantaged individuals with advancing. Affirmative action has helped disadvantaged people coming from other parts of the country where there are not very many opportunities for them to be able to advance where they otherwise could not. Simply put, the policy gives everyone an equal playing field. Well, for a number of years, the field has not been equal. Think about it with Jaden Miller. That's my podcast. And I want you to think about this for a minute. Is it equal yet? Has American Indians, have Latinos, have African Americans, have women, have they really now made it to an equal playing field? Are we on the 50-yard line, or, are some of us on the 10-yard line, third down and 9 to go, do some of us have to punt still? Okay, that's the question. All right. So let's look at a con to affirmative action. It destroys the idea of a meritocracy. All right. So those that are anti-affirmative action would argue that affirmative action has put race as the dominant factor in employee recruitment and social admission procedures, where it is believed that the best people for certain positions should be put there regardless of color and race. Now, there are people that would argue against this con simply because, well, how do you put the best people for certain positions, or how do you believe that the best people for certain positions should be put there regardless of color and race when, schools are not funded in lower class or racially different communities than they are in majority white communities? Okay. So yeah, the best people for certain positions should be put there regardless of color and race. But what if, my educational opportunities are less funded, less quality, than those that are from some suburban area? Okay. See, so there again is where, there's an argument against that con. All right. Here's another pro for affirmative action. It offers a boost to disadvantaged students. All right, it offers a boost to disadvantaged students. Students who started at a disadvantage need a boost, and this policy has made it happen. Generally speaking, these involve mostly minority students, usually coming from lower income families. They would have lesser opportunities to attend private schools, unlike white students. However, we should take note that sincere and hardworking minority students are every bit as capable as white students, but because of the disadvantages they experience, they were not having the same paper qualifications. Now, affirmative action makes sure to even the playing field a bit for these students, all right? And again, you know what the argument against this is, okay? That, well, we should all be on a level playing field, yes, but also those people who are best suited for the position should get them, okay? That is the argument against it offers a boost to disadvantaged students, all right? So that's coming from the con side. They would say, nah. All right, here's another con, okay, of affirmative action. It can still reinforce stereotypes and racism. All right, think about that for a minute. It can still reinforce stereotypes and racism. People who are given a position solely based on the stipulations of this policy are often not qualified, and the idea that all people under that race are all not qualified is perpetuated. Okay. Plus, affirmative action presupposes that all people having the same color of skin are from the lower class, therefore needing help. As we can see here, according to this reinforces stereotypes and even permanently embeds them into the country's system. All right, that is a con against affirmative action. All right. Again, those on the other side would ballyhoo that this is a bunch of BS, and this thing that people under that race are all not qualified is perpetuated, because this policy provides someone who is not qualified to be in a certain position. Again, the people on the pro side would call that nonsense. All right. Here on the pro side, another one. It promotes equality for all races. All right. This policy was designed as a means of helping to compensate for the fact that because of many years of oppression, some races are being held back in the race. Again, the policy makes sure this does not happen. All right. Now, those that would argue against this, coming from the con side, would say, well, that happened so many years ago, and my ancestors didn't have, they may have, played a part in that, but none of them are alive. And yes, I'm sure that, what they did was bad, but I didn't do it. Okay. So that's the argument for the con people against affirmative action. All right. Let me take a quick second here. All right. Just to talk to you about some good friends of mine, all right, that have their podcast. And so I want to promote them really quickly. It's called the Man Space podcast, all right? These guys are really terrific. I've listened to a number of their episodes. They are hilarious, okay? So this podcast features Russ and Les. They discuss life, relationships, and a multitude of subjects from a man's perspective. You can also find them on all of your favorite podcast platforms, just like me. And you can also listen to and find out more about Russ and Les and the Man Space podcast on their website, themanspacepodcast.com. So again, I'm recommending them to you all. Check them out. Again, the Man Space podcast. They talk about great issues from a man's perspective. Women, if you want to know what men are thinking, listen to Russ and Les. These guys are fabulous. All right. All right. So let's get back now to some of the pros and cons of affirmative action. Let's look at another con. All right. Okay. So here's one. It says it can lower the accountability standards that are needed to push employees and students to perform better. All right. The argument is that though some workers and students are self-motivated, an extra push or incentive is needed for most people to do their best. By setting lower hiring or school admission standards, the level of accountability is also lowered. It is important to reward discipline, hard work, and achievement, to not do it simply because a student is a member of a certain race, nor punish him because he is not. All right, and again, I believe that the people on the pro side would have a myriad of arguments to go against that one. All right, so here's another pro. All right. It is needed to compensate minorities for centuries of slavery or oppression. All right. So now, again, this is where you need to put on your history hat. During the first several centuries in the United States, white people were seen enslaving and oppressing Native Americans, Black people, and other minorities. That is a fact. It is undeniable. I know there are probably some people in this country that would like to deny this, but it is simple history. All right. So we can't talk about the greatness of the European nations, okay? You know how fabulous Great Britain was, or France, or Spain, okay? We can't talk about how great those nations are, but then omit, okay, all of the oppression, all of the wars, all of the evil, all of the stealing, from certainly the African continent. See, you can't ignore all of that, all right? So you can't talk about the greatness of and then not talk about all of the ugliness of, all right? And so there's a fact in this country that African Americans were enslaved and treated horribly, and sometimes still are. There is an undeniable fact that Native Americans who were here first, were cheated out of their land, killed, massacred, and then marched on to reservations where they languish and where they still suffer from the trauma of their ancestors. It's just passed down, okay? There's no denying, okay, that these things happen, all right? So the fact of the matter is that their lands were taken. Let's look at it this way, for African Americans, in this country, there were decades of unpaid labor, okay? Subjected to brutal punishments, all right, and denied most, if not all, of the United States Constitution's fundamental rights. Okay, what did the founders find this country on? Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. They were seeking freedom from Great Britain. Okay, all right, but then, and I've always seen this as really, really hypocritical, and I'm not taking away from the founders. I mean, they came up with a great democracy, a great form of government that has lasted these 230 plus years. I don't take anything away from them, but they were flawed men. You can be a great man and be a flawed man at the same time, okay? And while, they're wanting to establish a government, of we the people, okay? They failed to understand that, just because someone's skin is darker doesn't mean that they're not the people, okay? Just because, they don't dress like you do or have the same religious beliefs that you do doesn't make them less, all right? So affirmative action was implemented to provide a way to compensate their descendants for the wrongdoings suffered by the ancestors. So, the con people would argue that, I didn't do it. Yeah, we know that, all right, but we're not specifically talking about you. We're talking about a government, we're talking about companies, okay, that grew on the backs of slavery, all right? The United States, the wealth of the United States, the growth of the United States is because in many aspects of free labor, okay? Free labor from slaves and the stealing of land that was originally owned by Native Americans. That is not deniable, all right? let's see another con here. Um, hmm. One of the cons to affirmative action is this: it would help lead to a truly colorblind society. When you are applying for a job or filling out a college application, are you often asked about things such as skin, hair, and eye color, as well as height? Probably never, unless it is for an athletic or modeling position. This is because these details do not have any effect on your ability to do a job or succeed at school. There is no association between these details and discipline, intelligence, ambition, character, and other essentials, rendering such information useless. All right. So on the con side, I would agree. Okay. But see, you can't have a truly colorblind society. All right. Unless you start taking away, how law enforcement views people, how newspapers report things, how the media reports things. I mean, most of us have heard this before. I mean, the police say it all the time. What's the description of the offender? He's a male black. Okay. Well, all right. Now I understand that, if a crime is committed, you need a description of the individual. All right. But don't argue that we want to have a truly colorblind society, because we cannot have a truly colorblind society. All right. In fact, why would anyone want to live in a truly colorblind society? And again, this is the argument against cons that people would make. All right. Why not live in a society where we can showcase our differences? And some of us can't help but showcase them because we were born with them. Okay. All right. So why not be able to be who you are and still be accepted? Okay. So if I'm an African American man, how come I can't just be accepted as a man? All right. But still have love and respect for my culture and be able to, share that and be able to uphold that and be proud of that. So I don't take anything away from an Irish person that wants to talk about their Irish heritage or, their ancestors in Ireland or how, the English mistreated them and all of that. I don't take that away from you. Okay. If you were born in France, and your ancestors are from France, and you want to talk about how, hey, you have a love for, that country, and that's where your ancestors from. I don't think that that's a bad thing. Okay. If you are white and you are happy and proud of who you are, that there's no problem for me. But then, if I decide to put out a red, green, and black flag in front of my house, or the power sign, and I live in a mostly white community, then respect it. Don't look down on me. Okay. And so I think, again, that's the argument that others would make, that maybe this truly colorblind society is utopian thinking, which really would lead to a dystopian type of society. All right. Here's another pro, and I'm going to end on a pro and a con. All right. Here, it offers protection from hatred. All right. Though nothing can shield every individual from all the hatred they would encounter in life, affirmative action can at least help tremendously by enforcing strict and even harsh punishments on anyone who is found guilty of personal assault due to race, gender, or sexual orientation. The law makes many people think twice before committing an act that is filled with hatred or violence. All right, so that's the argument for affirmative action. And again, looking back at what the cons or those that are against affirmative action would say is that, well, we want to live in a colorblind society. But how can you live in a colorblind society, all right, or a society, that just sees us all the same, when hate crimes in the United States have gone up instead of gone down? So hate crimes against African Americans have grown. Okay. Hate crimes against Latinos, especially in the border states, has grown. Okay, uh, um, hate crimes against Jewish people, all right, have grown. Okay, hate crimes against Asian Americans have grown. All right, so how can we truly have this society where all of us are equal and all of us, should be Americans, and, there should be no regard to race? Well, I think that is a great goal to some degree, at least to be treated fairly and equally. Um, but is it reality? Okay. And the people that believe in affirmative action believe that it's not a reality, and that's why we continue to have laws in place and systems in place to ensure that those people that historically have been denied have opportunity. Okay, and I would think that those people on the con side, or those that are against affirmative action, would do all they could do to ensure that this doesn't continue to happen. And I'm talking about the hatred, the denial, the denying of opportunities. And the reason why I say that is because if that is the goal, if the goal is to have a society where people aren't hateful and that kind of thing, but when you don't step up and say anything, when you are silent, when you see racism in action, or if you are so far and removed from it and it does not even appear to you, okay? I mean, you can be walking down the street and walk right past, or you can hear an incident, okay, that is racially biased or racially discriminatory or racial hatred, and you keep walking and not acknowledge it, not say anything about it. That's horrible. And almost as horrible as the person that's committing the hate crime. Okay, silence really does say a lot. And unfortunately, in the United States of America, there's still too many people that are silent, okay, that won't speak up, that won't say anything, or are in complete denial that there is still racism, that there's still hatred, that there's still discrimination against Jewish people and women, all right, and other ethnic groups as well, all right. And to me, it's always been very, very simple, okay? School children, every day cite a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, okay? One nation, one. That means all of us, one. One nation under God. Indivisible. What does that word mean? Think about it. What does that word mean for those that won't speak up against racism or deny that it even happens? Or, what does indivisible mean? Okay. All right. So it's that whole pledge that we say, we sing, our national anthem. We talk about the home of the brave, the free and the brave, but yet, we're not brave enough to stand up for our own citizens, that are still experiencing to some degree, the issues that their ancestors were experiencing. And so, anyway, where are you on this issue? Think about it with Jaden Miller. Where are you? Do you feel as though affirmative action is played out, that it's time to move forward, that racism has definitely gone down, that we are all equal, women and African Americans and Latinos and all of us are all equal? Or are you for affirmative action where you think, yeah, of course there's been some progress made, the people on the con side, like to bring up certain individuals, they'll talk about, Barack Obama and, Oprah Winfrey, those are the names that are usually brought up, that they are good examples of, African Americans, that are influential in the United States. Yeah, I think, that's cool, and they are, but I think it's bad when you can only name a couple of people, when you can always go to those same names, that's not progress, that you can name a couple of people. I mean, they were able to name a couple of people back in the 1940s. They were able to name a couple of, people in the 1920s. These black people stood out, really ridiculous. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Again, this is Jaden Miller, and my podcast is Think About It with Jaden Miller. I want to give one more plug to those guys on the Man Space podcast. You gotta check them out. These guys are really good. They're knowledgeable. They're funny. I love listening to them. That's Russ and Les. They discuss life, relationships, and a multitude of subjects from a man's perspective. Check them out on any of the podcast platforms, and you can check them out on their website at themanspacepodcast.com. All right, again, this is me, Jaden Miller. Thank you guys for listening. And again, please like, share, and subscribe on my YouTube channel. And like, comment, and follow me on your favorite podcast platform. My website is www.jadenmiller.com. You can find out so much more about me and my podcast there as well. This is Wednesday. This is January. It is 2022. Thank you guys for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Think About It with Jaden Miller. Don't forget to like and subscribe to his YouTube channel, and like and follow on your favorite podcast platform.